Episode 4. This is the big one. Let's do this. Hey, welcome back. Episode 4, Fantasy Hockey News here. So, episode 3, we covered the top 10 scoring fantasy defenders in terms of breaking down points where goals equals 5 points, assists equals 2 points, shots 0.25 of a point, and a power play point is 1 point. So, John Carlson was on the top of that list. Yossi was second. And then Petrangelo, Theodore, guys like them were on the list. Sperinsky and Krug was on the bottom at number 10. So that's what we did episode 3. Today we're covering who I think would be the most overrated defenders in that list and probably going into next season here. And what do I mean by overrated? Overrated to me in fantasy is getting a lot of big time minutes. So first line, second line minutes in regular 5-on-5, and then owning your team's power play. So a couple examples that I want to go over. Just overrated right now would be Oliver Ekman-Larsson, PK Subban, and Drew Doughty. Guess I'll write his full name here. Probably spelled it wrong. Who knows? Nobody probably. So with these three guys here, what they all have in common is that they're their team's big defender. And what do I mean by that? I mean they play number one minutes against the team's top lines, 5-on-5. So they're averaging about 20, 21 minutes a game there. And then they play about 2.5 to 3 minutes on the power play. So if by adding all that together, they're playing around 22 to 25 minutes a game, just like the other top 10 defenders were. However, these guys were not getting near as many points as them. And why is that? Well, for one, I mean, some of them just don't have the skill that the others do. I mean, these guys are all kind of getting older now. And when you see the top scorers, so Hedman, Carlson, Yossi, they're right at 30 right now. And then the other guys that you see are the young guys coming up. So like McCarr, 23, Theodore, 25, I believe. So these guys kind of getting phased out of the NHL, still solid supporters. However, if you're like in a deep fantasy dynasty league, just poison to have these guys. However, if you're in like a Yahoo league, and these are all like your number 3, 4 defenders, pretty valuable guys to have. So it's all in respect to certain things. But in most cases, what I'm saying is if these are your big guys and you're going against a team that has, let's just say John Carlson, for example, well, you know that they're not going to hold up because Doughty's surrounded by a lot less talent than John Carlson, who would have Ovechkin, Backstrom, Kuznetsov, and like a Verana around him. So just a lot more talent that those guys have. So these guys considered my overrated defenders. Um, that being said, another one on the list would be Trouba. Reason why Trouba's on the list, he gets a lot of minutes. However, they're not on the power play. And so with that being said, he's never going to have the chance to really score lots. It's only going to be 5-on-5 minutes. So when you're kind of looking into your team and you want to get players that play a lot, you'll see Trouba, but this is just a wolf in sheep's clothing kind of thing here. I'd say stay away from Trouba unless you're in a league that counts hits or blocks. So he's more valuable in those kind of leagues, but strictly points, stay away from Trouba. And the last one I want to talk about here would be the Dumba, Spurgeon, and Sutter in Minnesota. So why do I have those guys on the board? It's just because this season they all shared first line responsibilities. They're always sharing minutes. There's no clear cut number one guy like Yossi's the clear cut number one in Nashville. Carlson clear cut number one in Washington. Pittsburgh's got Letang. So these guys just don't have that in Minnesota, which means split minutes, which means not going to be fantasy dominant, even though these guys are all playing relatively high minutes. So that's one category. These are my overrated defenders right now that I have in fantasy. So that being said, I want to also look at players that are going to take the next step. And there's a couple of things that I mean by this. So one thing is that there was players that were lost value due to injuries. Son of a gun. Who are those players? So Morgan Riley, Hamilton, and Makar. So even with their injuries, they also had a tough time here. So like Riley, he had a tough time in terms of Barry coming into Toronto, taking some away his minutes. So he was struggling. Then he got hurt. Even though he was kind of doing relatively good in terms of point per game production, I was looking at Riley taking possibly a bigger step. Like he broke out last season, and then this season it kind of just looked like he was doing okay, even though I kind of wanted him to do better. So this coming in season, I think he's going to have a chip on his shoulder. Toronto's going to have a chip on their shoulder. Riley's probably going to have a pretty big year. Probably will be in the top 10. Why? Well, just like Carl Saying he's their number one defender, surrounded by talent. He's talented. It just makes sense that he's going to be in the top 10 unless he gets hurt again. The same goes for Hamilton, who was also ripped off by injuries, and Makar. He didn't play as much, but he was also in the top 10. So I think he finished fifth. So Makar might even do better than that. He plays with McKinnon, who's the best fantasy point player, I think, in the league. Just got ripped off by injuries because Landeskog and Rantanen were hurt. So the power play, his first line was affected. So if everybody's healthy, Makar might be number 1, 2, or 3 in terms of top 10 fantasy point scoring defenders next year. So just going to be absolutely lethal. So that's injuries. Next step, just the young guys. And then we have Hiskinen, Hughes, Dahlin, Provorov, Makar. So these are just the next wave of defenders coming up. So like you have the old guys coming out, you have the new guys coming in, and I believe only Makar was on the list of the top 10 fantasy point scoring defenders. I could easily see Dahlin, Hughes, and Makar on the list next year. Who they push out, maybe like Pietrangelo, maybe Krug, and I'll get to that pretty soon here. But in terms of taking the next step, all these guys probably are going to do so. The only one to have reservations about would be Hiskinen, and that's because John Klingberg's still in Dallas. And with Klingberg in Dallas, they're going to just, out of respect to Klingberg, they're going to split the minutes on the power play. So less minutes, less points. So Klingberg and Hiskinen just not going to be having as many points as those guys that we just saw there. And then the last guy I want to talk about in terms of next step, so still got this, is change of scenery. And then that would be Barry. So this guy just might shoot up the list here in terms of defenseman scoring on fantasy, and that's because he's got Draisaitl and McDavid. So if McKinnon's the best point producer, Leon and Connor 2 and 3 or 2 and 4, with Pasternak in between somewhere. So Barry going to soak up all those minutes on the power play. Might not be a number 1 pairing defender in Edmonton, but like what you saw with D'Angelo. So that's exactly the same case here, which is pretty awesome if you own Barry for fantasy, especially in salary cap leagues because signed relatively cheap in Edmonton. So those are guys that I think will take the next step in terms of production from having kind of a poor season moving into a good season this year. And the last one I'm going to talk about, on the fence here. And there's just a little bit of a list here. So first one, Krug. So reason why Krug's on the list, new team, new scenery. He's just got to learn everything. So unless he comes in and just blows things off right off the hop, I think Parayko is going to play some minutes, maybe even done on the power play. So probably won't be a top 10 scorer in terms of fantasy production this year, but still probably going to have a good year because St. Louis is just a solid team. Second one I want to talk about in terms of being on the fence, Shabbat, and reason why I didn't include him with the young guys before with like Kiskin and Provorov. Ottawa just is in a weird place where they don't have an all-star goal scorer. So if you look at Winnipeg's power play, and if you go on the Google Doc, I spent a lot of time here, so it's got all the power plays listed, all the lines listed. So like line 1, line 2, line 3. I tell you who's on what line. It's all in the Google Doc, and then I break down everything so that you'll see who everybody's playing with and how exactly each power play is ranked. So just a lot of information for you to take in terms of how to evaluate your players in terms like that. And just seems like Ottawa, lots going on there. They're still figuring things out. They still need a goal scorer. So um, Shabbat here, just because he's got a lot of talent. He's the only really solid defender in Ottawa right now, with lots about to come up. But just I think a lot of people would agree with in terms of where the heck is he going to land on the fantasy point spectrum. So the other one, Klingberg, but we already talked about him. So lastly, Pietrangelo and Theodore. And reason being was Theodore was soaking up those huge minutes last time in Vegas, but now Pietrangelo is in here. Pietrangelo is the top 5 defender in the league. What's that going to do to Theodore's minutes? Probably going to dwindle them. So I can see Theodore taking a hit, and I can see Pietrangelo taking a hit just because new team figuring things out, just like Krug. So, I mean, if I were to bet, I'd say anywhere between 7 and 13 on the fantasy point list. I think they're both going to regress a little bit this year. And then the last one I want to cover is just how do I define this? Oh, just to sit and wait on. And the first one would be done in St. Louis, just because if you look at his points in the Google Doc sheet, you'll see that a lot of them come on the power play. It's just he's not giving a lot of opportunity. So if he's ever given the opportunity, he's going to get those points. So if he's ever your fourth or fifth guy on your fantasy team, either on Yahoo or deep leagues, I think that's just a really good player to have. So done. Sit on him. I think he's got the potential to get you a lot more. And then someone who's been a little bit disappointing, but is bound to break out eventually, would be Ekblad. Skills there. He scores lots of goals every year. I think he scored over 10 each season, even since his first year as a rookie. And he shoots a lot. So he does have value. It's just he doesn't have a lot of points yet, but the points will come. I think it's just a matter of time before it gets there. So those are the big things I wanted to talk about in terms of fantasy scoring defenders. What kind of happened last season, what to look forward into this season, and then now we'll look at the top 10 scoring fantasy centers. And then from there, we'll do the same thing if this was a video people enjoyed. So Give me a like, a share, friggin' follow me on here, and then give me a follow on Twitter. Let me know what kind of videos you want me to cover. Plan is now that if you look at the Google Doc, would be let's look at every team's power play too. Let's see who's getting what minutes and where. So let's try to find top 7 players on each team if they'll play the power play. Lots of value there. And yeah, episode 4, Fantasy Defenders, in depth.